Hey everyone, and welcome back to Retro Legends. Today we're going on a journey back in time to uncover 10 things you probably didn't know about the Game Boy, the handheld console that changed the world of gaming forever. From its beginnings in Nintendo's secret labs to its incredible success and strange behind-the-scenes stories, get ready to discover some hidden facts about this legendary gaming device. Let's get started. The Game Boy isn't just an icon of handheld gaming. It's the brainchild of one of the most important, and often overlooked, figures in Nintendo's history, Gunpei Yokoi. Yokoi's journey with Nintendo began in the 1960s as an electronics engineer. Back then, Nintendo was still a toy company, a far cry from the video game giant we know today. One day, during a train ride, Yokoi noticed a fellow Nintendo employee passing the time by fiddling with an LCD calculator. That seemingly ordinary moment sparked a brilliant idea. If people could find enjoyment in a simple calculator, why not create a small device specifically designed for gaming, Yokoi wondered. This was the seed that would eventually blossom into the Game & Watch, and years later, the Game Boy. But his philosophy extended far beyond just portable design. Yokoi developed a concept that would become a cornerstone of Nintendo: lateral thinking with withered technology. In essence, you don't need the most powerful or cutting-edge hardware to create unforgettable gaming experiences. In fact, using proven, reliable, and affordable technology often allows for greater innovation in game design itself. This was a radical notion, especially in an industry already obsessed with graphics, power, and the next big thing. Yokoi, however, believed that truly successful games were those with solid, intuitive, and engaging mechanics, regardless of the hardware's capabilities. That's why, even in 1989, while rivals like the Atari Lynx and Sega Game Gear boasted color screens and advanced specs, the Game Boy launched with a simple black and white display without a backlight. It seemed like a step backward. Instead, it was a triumph. The secret? Incredible battery life, a competitive price, and a library of games designed for pure fun. And behind it all was Gunpei Yokoi, a man who changed the world of video games not with brute technological force but with the brilliance of his ideas. Even after the Game Boy, his legacy continued. Just look at the Virtual Boy, an ambitious but ill-fated project, or the WonderSwan, his final creation after leaving Nintendo. Yokoi left us too soon in a tragic car accident in 1997. His way of thinking remains at the heart of Nintendo to this day. Before the world knew it as Game Boy, the most beloved handheld console of all time was known internally by a much less catchy name, DMG, short for Dot Matrix Game. This name is still printed on the back of the original units, often accompanied by the full code DMG01, a real treat for collectors and retro gaming enthusiasts. But what exactly is a dot matrix game? The term refers to the display technology used, a monochrome dot matrix LCD screen, which is made up of small pixels arranged in a grid capable of displaying images in grayscale. A choice that, already in 1989, was seen as technologically outdated. Competing consoles, like the Atari Lynx or the Sega Game Gear, boasted backlit color screens and more advanced technology. Yet, the Nintendo team made a counterintuitive choice. Gunpei Yokoi, with his philosophy of lateral thinking with withered technology, strongly pushed to keep a simple screen. Why? Because it meant longer battery life, lower costs, and greater accessibility. An advanced screen would have required more batteries, would have raised the price, and made the Game Boy less portable. Instead, the DMG's aging technology guaranteed 20 to 30 hours of playtime with 4 AA batteries, a true revolution for its time. The DMG01 code thus became a sort of trademark, and the name Game Boy was only introduced later for the global market. Interestingly, the term Game Boy was met with some skepticism by some internal departments, especially in the West. It seemed like too childish a name, almost like a toy. But in the end, that very simplicity became its strength. Despite the Japanese team's excitement, the Game Boy's launch in the United States was not a sure thing. When the console was presented to the American branch, Minoru Arakawa, president of Nintendo of America, and son-in-law of Nintendo's founder, was extremely skeptical. From his perspective, it was a huge risk to introduce a console with a black and white, non-backlit screen, and a simple design to the US market, which was already excited about new technologies. While consumers in Japan were perhaps more inclined to appreciate the Game Boy's simplicity, Arakawa was convinced that the American public would prefer devices that were cooler, more flashy. In short, he feared a flop. And this is where one of the most brilliant decisions in video game history comes in: the bundle with Tetris. Tetris wasn't just a game, it was pure addiction in the form of a puzzle. No need for 3D graphics or special effects, just a few falling blocks and a brain trying to fit them in the right place. The gameplay was so simple, immediate, and universal that even those who had never touched a video game found themselves sucked into that hypnotic loop. Arakawa understood that Tetris would break down generational and cultural barriers. It wasn't a children's game, but an experience that could fascinate businessmen, parents, grandparents, anyone. And that's exactly where the bet was played. No longer just a console for playing, but an object for everyone, like a paperback book or a pastime for traveling. It was a revolutionary move. Nintendo could have launched the Game Boy with a more classic title, maybe a Mario platformer, but the choice of Tetris was strategic and aimed at the heart of the Western market. The result? A triumph. The Game Boy immediately became a worldwide success, with stratospheric sales right from launch. Thousands of people, even those who didn't consider themselves video game players, started carrying the Game Boy with them everywhere. In airports, in the office, on the train. And all this thanks to a Soviet puzzle game, programmed by a mathematician from Moscow, which found its definitive home right in the pockets of Americans, thanks to the intuition of a team that knew how to look beyond graphic power. Today, if we think about the Game Boy, one of the first games that comes to mind is Tetris. But you know what's really incredible? At first, Nintendo hadn't even thought about including it in the bundle. The initial idea was much more traditional: to launch the console with a homegrown title, something safe, maybe with Super Mario Land as the spearhead. Mario was already a global icon, and it seemed natural to push his image even for the new portable console. Yet everything changed when someone within Nintendo, particularly Hank Rogers, an entrepreneur linked to the Japanese division, saw something different in Tetris, something very powerful. Tetris had no characters, no colors, no levels to explore. It just had blocks falling from above, but there was something about that gameplay so simple and immediate that it was magnetic, almost hypnotic. Once you started, you couldn't stop. And here's the beauty. Tetris wasn't a Nintendo game. It was created by Alexei Pajitnov, a programmer who worked in Moscow within the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Yes, right in the heart of the Soviet Union, in the middle of the Cold War. And at the time, getting the rights to Soviet software wasn't exactly like signing a contract in California. Nintendo realized that this game had enormous potential, especially for the American and European market. So, they decided to try everything. Hank Rogers, practically alone, flew to Moscow to try to obtain the distribution rights. The atmosphere was surreal. It was still the era of the KGB, tapped phones, meetings behind closed doors. And Tetris, meanwhile, was already circulating in the West, but without anyone actually having the legal permission to distribute it. Rogers found himself dealing directly with E-Lorg, the Soviet state agency responsible for software licenses. What followed is almost like a movie. Confused contracts, Western competitors trying to steal each other's rights, and Rogers who, with calmness and determination, managed to obtain exclusive rights for Nintendo for the portable format. And that's where the magic happened. When the Nintendo of America team, initially very skeptical of the Game Boy, considered too simple, too old with a black and white screen, saw the potential of Tetris, everything changed. It was no longer a children's console. It was an object for everyone. Tetris spoke a universal language, understandable by anyone, even those who had never touched a video game in their lives. The result? A global success. The Game Boy sold millions of units, also thanks to that unconventional choice, not a Nintendo title, not an icon like Mario, but a black and white Soviet puzzle. And that's what made the difference. Tetris has shown that in the world of video games, ideas matter more than colors, more than characters, more than fads. Back in the 1990s, the world of handheld video games was a tough place to be. Nintendo had some serious competition, like the Atari Lynx and the Sega Game Gear. On paper, these consoles were way more advanced. They had color screens, better tech specs, and they offered gaming experiences that were closer to what you'd find on a home console. They were, in a way, more modern. But the Game Boy made a different choice, a quieter one, but incredibly effective. It gave up on the race for power and focused on efficiency and long-lasting gameplay. Its monochrome dot matrix screen didn't use much energy, and this allowed the console to have a battery life that was practically unthinkable for its competitors. With 4 simple AA batteries, the Game Boy could guarantee up to 30 hours of continuous play. That number, compared to the 4 to 6 hours of the Game Gear, or the even more power-hungry Atari Lynx, seemed almost like magic. The Game Boy wasn't just a portable console, it was a travel buddy. Kids took it on vacation, on long car rides, on train journeys in the afternoon. Parents were more likely to buy it precisely because they didn't have to change the batteries every day. Its long battery life made it reliable, and in a time when rechargeable batteries weren't common, this was a huge difference. And it doesn't end there. The Game Boy found its way into environments completely different from those for which it was designed. There are stories of American soldiers during the Gulf War who brought their Game Boys with them to pass the time between missions. In a harsh environment far from home and with very little entertainment, that little gray console became a small personal refuge. There's even a Game Boy that survived an explosion, melted and blackened, but still working. Today it's on display at the Nintendo store in New York as a symbol of the console's incredible resilience. Basically, while others were chasing the wow factor and the spectacle of color, Nintendo had understood something simple but profound. True portability is not just a matter of size, but of battery life, durability, and accessibility. The Game Boy wasn't perfect, but you could take it anywhere, play it for hours, and it never let you down. There's a Game Boy on display at the Nintendo World Store in New York that survived an explosion during the Gulf War. The unit is melted and deformed, but incredibly it still works and runs Tetris on a loop, a symbol of its incredible resilience. In 1998, the Game Boy Light was released, but only in Japan. It had a cool new feature, a green-blue backlight so you could see the screen in the dark. It also had batteries that lasted longer. It was like a test run before the Game Boy Color came out. And now, it's a collector's item. A lot of musicians and DJs started using the Game Boy to make music. They used special software called LSDJ, which stands for Little Sound DJ. This started a whole new type of music called chiptune. Chiptune uses the Game Boy's original sounds to make electronic music that sounds like it's from the 8-bit era. Today the Game Boy is experiencing a revival thanks to the homebrew scene. There are new cartridges, modern games developed by fans, and entire modding kits to transform it into a console with backlighting, IPS screens, and USB-C ports. It's a piece of history that continues to evolve 35 years after its release. And that concludes our trip down memory lane. How many of these fun facts did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Thanks for watching Retro Legends, and see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.